pretty interesting last Friday morning after the first NFL game as they were walking through the halls of the Pentagon. You didn't have to ask who won the game. Chief vASC would tell you. Again, I'm not a Chiefs fan, but I will tell you, I do like their quarterback, Patrick Mahomes, a fellow Texas Tech grad. I want to thank the President, the Vice President, the Secretary of Defense, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, and the Senate for my nomination and my confirmation. I appreciate your trust and confidence in me. I also want to thank my teammate, the Chief of Space Operations. You know, I first met General Raymond when we were majors at Air Command and Staff College. We've had a chance to work together over our careers, and it's interesting that the two of us now are the top uniform members for our respective services. There's some things we may agree or disagree on, but the one thing we can agree on at this age, hair is highly overrated. I want to thank industry and Congress for all they do for our airmen to put capability into their hands. I want to thank our airmen and families for all the sacrifices, their dedication, and for what they do. I'm extremely proud to work for you, and I owe it to you to provide you the quality of service and the quality of life that you deserve. I want to thank my wife, Shireen. She's been with me for 31 years, and when she said I do, she joined this Air Force family. We've had 20 different moves and bounced all around our country and around the world. I also want to thank our sons, Sean and Ross, who've grown up to be two outstanding young men. You know, I recall a dinner we had when I was a one-star, and we were at a fork in the road to determine whether I was going to stick with the Air Force or retire and go on and do something else. And I asked the boys, hey, Sean and Ross, what do you think? What should I do? And they said, Dad, you should keep going. And so I did. And today, here I am. I also want to thank the former Chiefs of Staff of the Air Force, in particular, General Ron Fogelman. General Fogelman took a chance on me and made me his aide-de-camp. Very interesting, because I did not actually volunteer. I didn't put in a package. I just got notified by my commander when he called me in and said, hey, you're being considered to be the aide to the Chief of Staff of the Air Force. I'll be honest with you, I was completely clueless. I had to ask him, so what does an aide do? And I figured it out pretty quickly what an aide does, and also I learned a lot about our Air Force. I want to thank General Fogelman and Mr. James for giving me the opportunity. I also want to thank some of the other Chiefs of Staff I had a chance to either work for or were mentored by, General Mosley, General Schwartz, and General Welsh. You know, General Welsh, for the past 9 months, served as my executive coach, preparing me for confirmation and the transition into the job. Most importantly, I want to thank General Dave Goldfein and his wife, Dawn. You know, I first met Dave Goldfein, we were aides together. I've had a chance to work with him and serve with him throughout my Air Force career, most notably serving as his deputy when he was the commander of AFCENT. I want to thank Dave and Dawn for their leadership and for allowing a smooth transition for Shireen and I. And thanks to all of our prior Chief Master Sergeants of the Air Force and Chiefs of Staff of the Air Force for setting the foundation for me as I come into the job. I will tell you, Air Force has been busy. Even with COVID, there's been no slowdown. And so I'd like to share a short video with you. It'll show you a little bit of where we've been, but it'll also show you where we're going. You know, we're at an inflection point when we can't defer change. You probably noticed the video towards the end. The photos got faster and faster and faster. Remember the movie Talladega Nights with Ricky Bobby? Just like Ricky Bobby, I want to go fast. And so I've laid out my strategic approach. Basically, my central theme as your Chief of Staff: accelerate change or lose. You know, the world is changing. We're in a very dynamic environment. We're taking various actions in response. And so we're changing. And we have a window of opportunity. A window of opportunity to change, to control and exploit the air domain to the standard our nation expects and requires from its Air Force. If we don't change, if we fail to adapt, we risk losing. We risk losing in a great power competition, we risk losing in a high-end fight, we risk losing quality airmen, losing budget dollars, our credibility, and aspects of our national security. Now, I fully realize we won't do this alone. We'll require collaboration with all of our key stakeholders, both internal and external to the Air Force. And for all of us, we need to remove any of the internal impediments that will stop us from moving forward. We are moving out and moving with a purpose. We have a number of challenges, some that are familiar and some that are new, and several factors that are driving us to change. I characterize these as accelerants. The National Defense Strategy. The National Defense Strategy, published in January 2018, talks about how we reform our practices across the Department of Defense. That includes our United States Air Force. The stand-up of the Space Force gives us an opportunity to take a look at ourselves as the Air Force and how we might change. COVID, as tragic as it may be, it's actually driven us to do some things we hadn't planned to do for a while, particularly on our information technology systems. This is an opportunity. There's a racial disparity within our nation, and the reviews we're doing inside of the Air Force, another opportunity to drive change. And I fully expect there'll be pressures on our budget. That, too, will drive change for our United States Air Force. We have two options. We can admire the problem and talk about how tough this is going to be, how hard the decisions are going to be able to make, or we can take action. I vote for the latter. We must take action. We must accelerate change or lose. Accelerate change or lose is the why. Today, I want to go into the what. Before I do, let me put some things in context. I've had a chance to serve as a joint officer throughout my career. My first opportunity was as a major, and I will tell you it wasn't by choice. I'd been serving as the aide for 21 months with General Fogleman. I went to Alpha Air Command and Staff College, and my whole master plan was to go back to flying. And I got redirected to go to a joint job at United States Central Command as a major. It wasn't by choice, partly because I wasn't going to fly again for a while. It was exactly 4 years and 11 months before I got back in the cockpit. That sets the stage for me to be a joint officer as a GO. As a general officer, I've spent most of my time at the air component, commanding air components, and at the combatant command, to include being the deputy commander at United States Central Command. And part of that aspect is we used the 5-paragraph operation order and how we communicate our guidance to our joint leaders. A key aspect of this is, in order to do that and understand and develop joint leaders, we got to do a little bit of the same inside of our Air Force. And so I'm laying out some action orders that are in that format. Now, the one thing I did find as we worked through those is that typically these op orders would have an end state. And I often found that our end states were aspirational and sometimes unachievable. And so I've actually used the term pass-through states. With this infinite game that we're in, as the environment and the threat changes, we have to adapt. And so we're passing through different states and hitting different waypoints on the journey. And that's the way I'm approaching this with our action orders. And so my focus is pretty simple. It's as simple as A, B, C, and D. Airmen, bureaucracy, competition, and design implementation. So the first action order is A, Airmen, our most valuable resource. As I came into the job, I purposely selected where I wanted to go on my first couple of trips. I went to Lackland with the Secretary and Chief Bass, and then the following week I went to Maxwell. The two locations where we develop our new airmen and develop leaders. Our mission is to empower and develop leaders. All airmen, officer, enlisted, and civilian. We need to recruit, assess, retain, and develop each one of them. Now, we've made some progress in our talent management as we develop our airmen. We established My Vector. We eliminated below the zone for our officers. We also set up our developmental categories. We eliminated promotion testing for our senior NCOs and raised high-year tenure. And we also accelerated our civilian hiring processes. Matter of fact, I was in a meeting here just a week or so ago, and we're leading the way for the Department of Defense. Now, all these, are they all about right? We will continue to adjust and evaluate and continue to move forward on our talent management processes. The key aspect, though, is we need to build leaders. Leaders that have a culture that can build and articulate intent. They feel comfortable enough that they can delegate down to the lowest capable and competent level, and that we have trust throughout all levels of command. Trust so that our airmen trust their leadership, and trust that our leaders trust their airmen, that they can delegate down and they can get the job done. We need to empower airmen with confidence. Confidence to lead, confidence to make decisions. When the communication is contested, when the guidance is unclear or the situation is uncertain. How we do that is how we communicate and how we pass information back and forth. I had the chance to work for General Mattis when he was the commander of the United States Central Command. And one of the things he talked about, instead of command and control, it was command and feedback. He actually even talks about it in his most recent book. That really resonates with me. It's really the dialogue that happens between different levels of command through all times no matter what the environment's like. We got to continue that communication so we have that confidence so we can delegate down. When I was the CFAC at LUD, I had a British officer who worked for me, and he used the term proceed until apprehended. I think that's a pretty appropriate approach. You're not always going to have the right guidance or clear guidance, and so in some cases you got to figure out what to do on your own. You need to proceed until apprehended, but that communication ensures that we have good dialogue so you're moving out in the right direction. We need to create the right environment where we value the perspectives of all of our airmen and the diversity of thought. And key and important is developing and permitting sustainable diversity, inclusion, and belonging programs across everything we do for our airmen and families. This cannot be a flash in the pan. It can't be something that fades away after a couple of years. It's something we got to sustain for the long haul. We must focus on developing airmen that are ready to lead in future crises, contingencies, and conflicts. We've got to make the Air Force an attractive career choice where all airmen can see themselves at all levels in all career fields, and that they have the quality of service and the quality of life they deserve. We have to empower airmen. In order to do that, we need to address bureaucracy, which takes me to the second of the action orders, B. We need to take a different approach. We need to make decisions at the speed of relevance. Those decisions need to be informed by analysis and be made in a timely manner to outpace our competitor decision cycle. Remember John Boyd and the OODA loop? We need to do that at the strategic level. The first step, though, is we need to look ourselves in the mirror and clean up our own house. And that starts on the air staff. We need to amend our decision processes. We need to make decisions with an enterprise-wide approach versus in silos. I want to make decisions for the good of the entire Air Force, not for just parts of the Air Force. How we do that is we increase collaboration and communication across our staffs. I had the opportunity as a general officer, particularly in my time with United States Central Command, to work with our Joint Special Operations Command. And one thing I found is they know how to communicate. They know how to break down those barriers, to push information back and forth. When they do their updates to their commanding general, yes, there's some PowerPoint slides, but at the same time, most of the staff is plugged in, sitting in front of a computer, and they're on chat. And so while the conversation is going on, there's a sub-conversation that's going on across the staff to break down barriers, to cut through bureaucracy, to drive decisions. The other key aspect I want to make sure we do is, the challenge I have as a senior officer, as information comes to you, it's usually filtered. And folks bring stuff to you when we actually have consensus. Once we've got to a point where everybody can agree. When we do that, we sub-optimize and maybe cut out some of the options we might have. I often talk about having the meeting after the meeting, in the meeting. How often have you gone into a meeting and no one says anything, but as soon as you get in the hallway, now everybody has an opinion? The same thing happens in a video teleconference. No one says anything during the conference because you're following protocol, but as soon as the mic drops and we cut the VTC, now everybody has an opinion. We must have the meeting after the meeting, in the meeting, so we can have some hard conversations. One of the things I'll do is review our roles and responsibilities between Headquarters Air Force staff and our MATCHCOMs. We do have some overlap. Some of that's good, but some of it may be redundant. We need to eliminate some of those redundancies. And that may drive some levels of reorganization. And if we do reorg, form must follow function. Any efficiency we gain, we need to turn into opportunities to repurpose manpower so we can put that manpower against emerging missions or under-resourced missions. We also need to cut the restrictions to our allies and partners. We can't make it so hard to actually share information to get to foreign military sales or for interoperability. We've got to work on that. We also need to work very closely with our industry partners to deliver warfighting capability into the hands of our airmen faster. Our decision-making processes should not impede the potential of our airmen. They should be able to operate at a sustainable pace and manpower-healthy organizations so we can generate the air power our nation needs. We must get Action Order A and Action Order B right so we can better compete, which takes me to the third of the action orders, C, competition. The National Defense Strategy outlined that China and Russia are great power competitors. And as we look at the National Defense Strategy, I'm sure it'll evolve over time. Even with that evolution, China and Russia will still be our great power competitors. For all of us, we need to understand competition. We also need to know, for every one of our airmen, need to understand our connection to the mission and how we contribute to competition. It doesn't matter if you're air crew, medical technician, an area reporter, an intel analyst, or a maintainer. You need to understand your connection to the mission and how it helps competition. If you're not sure, ask your commander. And I expect our commanders to be able to articulate and share that with their airmen, how they contribute to competition and to the mission of the United States Air Force. For every single one of us, we need to accelerate our understanding of our competitors. We need to drive competition to our advantage, and we need to understand and exploit the vulnerabilities of our competitors. This will help us to enhance our deterrence credibility and assure our national security. We need to improve our approach with renewed emphasis on competitive thinking, competitive analysis, and decision processes. And we got to be willing to take some risk. You know, just a couple of weeks ago, I had a chance to be at the Doolittle Leadership Center dedication. And at that dedication, the son of Dick Cole, Rich Cole, was with us. You know, Dick Cole was the last surviving member of the Doolittle Raiders who passed away, sadly, last year. And Rich had a quote, and it really resonated with me because after the ceremony, I went up to Rich and said, I really like your quote, and you don't mind, I'm going to use that here in the future. And today I want to share that with you. And Rich said, leadership without risk is called management. We don't need more managers in the Air Force, we need more leaders. I don't plan to manage change. I plan to lead change. And by leading change, we're going to have to take some risk. I'm going to have to take some risk. And as we take that risk, it needs to be measured and informed. And I hope that you'll come with me as we make some of these risk decisions. We need to make these risk decisions and lead change so that we can compete at the right place, at the right time, with the right capability. You know, when our boys were much younger and they played soccer, and many of you can relate, you wake up on a Saturday morning, you're rushing to get to this big soccer complex that's got 20, 30 different fields, hundreds of kids running around. And just as you get there, just before games start, you figure out, shucks, we're at the wrong field. It frustrates you, it frustrates your kids. Their game's off, they're not going to compete. The same thing happens in great power competition. If we don't understand our adversary, we will show up with the wrong capability, at the wrong place, at the wrong time, competing on the wrong field. We got to compete on the right field. And that starts in our session programs. It starts also in our professional military education. We need to think deeper about our competitors and understand what makes them tick, how they think about warfighting. And we're already down that path. Our major commands are doing this. I was just at their university. We had a good discussion about what they're incorporating into our academic programs. All this so we can compete, deter, and win, but also adapt, because things will change. The facts and assumptions will always change. Our adversary will change. Our competitors will change. We got to be willing to adapt. You know, often in our professional military education programs, we talk about Sun Tzu. And one of his quotes is, if you know the enemy and you know yourself, your victory will not stand in doubt. We need to take those words to heart. We just can't study them. We got to live them. We got to know our enemy. And we also need to know ourselves so we can remove doubt. Which takes me to the last of the action orders, D, design implementation. We stood up the Air Force warfighting integration capability, and we must continue that future design work. We must accelerate the operational concepts and the force structure that they're laying out. I fully realize that future budgets will drive us to make some difficult force structure decisions. Whatever decisions we make, they need to be affordable, defensible based on analysis, and congressionally supported. We must transition from the force we have today to the force that's required, that's focused on China and Russia, accepting various levels of risk to mission, risk to force, and some risk to our security, all within budget constraints. You know, as a PACAF commander, one of the things I would show is a slide that showed a comparison between the number of platforms China would have in 2025, the number of platforms the U.S. and our allies and partners in the region would have by 2025. And we're outnumbered. But it's not about the platforms, it's about the capability. We need to elevate our thinking. When you start talking about capability, it's not only the platforms, but it's the outstanding airmen we have. It's the outstanding allies and partners we have. It's our ability to use that capability. That's the force multiplier for us. We need to learn from previous modernization efforts and ensure we're making enterprise-wide decisions to provide the best Air Force our taxpayer dollars can buy. That's going to force some hard conversations. We're going to have to assess those programs that are underperforming, or those that are no longer affordable, or those that won't deliver relevant capability for 2030 and beyond. Those are going to be some hard conversations and some very tough decisions. We need to maximize our capabilities so we have a full up round. We can't have the platform that's incomplete. We've got to have, with that platform, the manpower, the sensors, the command and control, the weapons, and the sustainment. I think it's better to have a force of quality than a force of quantity that is missing parts. Parts like manpower, sensors, command and control, weapon systems, and sustainment. At the same time, we get to think about how we do our force generation and force presentation to the joint force. Our A3 team's been on a sprint, and now under the leadership of Lieutenant General Gus Costello, we're going to conclude that sprint. I sat down with Gus on Friday to say, hey, when are we going to get this thing done so we can go ahead and deliver? My goal is to get this done by the end of the year. We want to make our force generation and force presentation model easy for us to understand and to articulate inside of our Air Force, easy to understand in our joint force, to ensure we provide the right capabilities at the right place at the right time, while we maintain readiness for now and into the future. As we do this, and we do design implementation, we're going to have to balance risk. We're going to have to balance investments across our various mission sets and our various capabilities. We're going to have to be more proactive than reactive. If you go back to Accelerate, Change, or Lose, on the last page, there's a quote from Julio Duhé. And it says, "Victory smiles upon those who anticipate the change in the character of war, not upon those who wait to adapt themselves after the change occurs." We have to be proactive, not reactive. And so we're proactive. We're already moving out. The Air Staff already has the action orders. Our first update will be at Corona here in just a couple of weeks. I realize that first update won't be the end-all, be-all. It is a waypoint on the journey. We're going to iterate. We're going to adapt. But in any fact, no matter how this plays out, I'm going to keep the throttle forward. Remember Ricky Bobby? I want to go fast. I want to go fast. I want to go fast. In order to do that, we need to incentivize and recognize innovation. And I will tell you, there's few better than understand competition and the need for innovation than our longest-serving Vice Chief of our United States Air Force, General Sebby Wilson. So in partnership with the Air Force Association, we're establishing an award, the General Stephen W. Wilson Advanced Concept Engagement Award. You know, our Air Force has a culture with innovative thought leaders, bold leaders, and sometimes mavericks like Billy Mitchell and John Boyd. This award is for those thought leaders willing to drive emerging ideas, not to take no as the final answer, and take cutting-edge technology and put those in the hands of our warfighters faster. This award is designed to incentivize and recognize those that are innovative, bold thought leaders, and mavericks. In closing, in order to move forward and accelerate change, we're going to have to collaborate in constant dialogue with all of our key stakeholders, both internal and external to the Air Force. Like the Avengers, each Avenger has its own superpower. Each of our key stakeholders has a vested interest. We need to come together and use our superpowers for good. We've done this before. We can do it again. We don't change today, we lose tomorrow. We must accelerate change now. And how do we do that? A, empower and develop airmen to lead. B, addressing bureaucracy. C, be better prepared to compete. And D, make hard choices with design and implementation. We can't predict the future. We can shape it, just like the Avengers. You know, as the Avengers in the end game, just before parting ways to retrieve the Infinity Stone, Captain America said, "We need to get this right. We may only have one shot. No do-overs." For our United States Air Force, we need to get this right. We may only have one shot. No do-overs. Accelerate change or lose.
Well, we're going to have a chance now to ask General Brown some questions. I hope you've used Slido to roll some questions toward us. General, thanks for doing this, and really interesting to get to hear your extended take on accelerate change now or lose. First question we'll take is from an anonymous submitter. He says, "Sir, Chief Goldfein truly believed reinvigorating squadrons was key, but the frozen middle these days seems to be 06 through 08. How will you address this?"
This is why I talk about having the meeting after the meeting and the meeting. I want to figure out what those pockets of resistance are and address what their concerns are. You know, we got to be willing to take risk, and that's a challenge. Folks are risk averse. You know, we can't be innovative and risk averse at the same time. Okay, so part of this is I'm willing to take those risks and figure out how we do things. Are we going to fail on some of this? Maybe it's some of it. But the big part is we got to empower airmen to do this. And we've got outstanding airmen that are chomping at the bit to go forward. And I think I owe that to them to be able to do that.
So you talked about trust, and I think trust is a key there, right? Because if your subordinates trust you, they can feel like they can say something, and if they don't, they won't. And vice versa. If you trust your subordinates, you can let them speak. Some people are a little afraid to let that happen. Well,
yeah, true. But you know, part of this is we're always worried about some aspect that we might get in trouble. Actually, I want some folks to figure out when best to move forward and do things that are going to actually do things a little bit differently. That's why that dialogue is important, to figure out how best to do this. And the more you understand about what folks are trying to achieve, the more trust you'll have. And it requires that dialogue back and forth. It also takes time to sit down and take time to sit down and engage with folks. You know, one of the things I've done as a senior leader is I would do brown bag lunches with different parts of my staff. just so I could hear from the lower levels, because I can get it unfiltered. And that's why I talk about that culture of consensus. By the time I get information, it's already been baked, and I can't influence it.
Right. So you mentioned a need to create a force where our airmen at all levels can see themselves able to do anything. So do you foresee perhaps a future chief of staff who's not been a pilot?
I do. I mean, I honestly do. And we need to be thinking about that. When you start taking a look at what we're doing with cyber and other aspects of our Air Force that are leading some of the operational aspects of what we're doing, or information warfare. I mean, those kinds of things we got to be thinking about, having the right person with the right skill set, and it's really about leadership as well. When you become a general, you're a generalist as well, but you have some background, and I think that's a key aspect.
So what do you see as the biggest hurdle to overcome fear of failure at whatever level, and to really drive that decision-making at the lowest levels?
Well, part of it is as we worked with all of our stakeholders, because each has an interest, and they all want us to be successful. But if we take so hard to make everything perfect, we never move forward. And so part of this, we all got to be willing to take risks. It can't be just me and parts of the United States Air Force. It's how we work with our combatant commands, how we work with the Department of Defense, how we work with industry, for all of us to take a little bit of risk as we move forward and do things a bit differently.
The whole thing about accelerating change sort of can be taken as, well, what have we been doing? Have we been complacent? I don't think that's where you're going. So what does this say about sort of the culture of the Air Force as you see it today and that you're inheriting?
Well, there's a couple of things. You just think about, folks don't want to change once they're in their comfort zone. You got to have a forcing function that drives change. And I laid out all these factors or accelerants. You have all these things that are forcing us to change anyway. And we also know about the national defense strategy. The key aspect of this is to prepare ourselves for 2030. There's things we've got to do now. And I just foresee if we don't start doing things a bit faster, we're going to be behind. And the advantage we have, it will continue to erode. And that's my concern. I may not succeed in everything I'm trying to push, but it won't be due to lack of trying.
So you want to go fast.
Just like Ricky Bobby.
China and Russia are gaining power and influence by taking actions below the threshold of eliciting a violent response. How do we combat that?
This is part of us understanding our adversaries and understanding our competitors and how they operate, and how we work together with different aspects of interagency. So because the Department of Defense doesn't have all the authorities to do things, and it's how we work with different aspects of our government to identify and then be proactive. The key aspect for us is we got to be thinking ahead of where our Russia and China may be going, so we can put things in place to allow us a better chance to compete versus being reactive after it's already happened and then figuring out what we're going to do, because they've already moved on to the next event. We got to stay one step ahead of them.
Sometimes change is held back by outside forces. You may want to retire an aging aircraft, but you don't have the ability. How do you address those kinds of institutional forces that you can't always take care of on your own?
Well, it's one of the areas I want to get away from is we really get focused on platforms. We need to talk about capability. And so whether it's airlift, our combat air forces, mobility, cyber, all these kind of come together, and each of these platforms contributes to that. And if we start talking about individual platforms, we start to do what I would call almost like a Jenga puzzle. We start pulling out parts, and then we have an incomplete capability. What I need to do is talk about risk, and we don't do that very well. So what's the risk to the Air Force and to the Joint Force when we have incomplete capability? We got to have that dialogue. And if we as a nation are willing to buy that risk, then I'm going to provide my best military advice, just so we understand what risk we're taking if we don't change. And that's a key aspect. I think we don't have those conversations all the time. We get into the details of, down into the weeds of the platform and not talk about the risk and the impact it's going to have to the nation and our security.
So you and General Raymond may have agreed that hair is no longer the most important thing in life, but what you still have to do is kind of feel your way in something that's really totally brand new.
Right.
Two guys who are chiefs of their services in one department and ultimately kind of one budget pie, right? So how do you work through that and be joint and be mutually supportive and still look out for the things that are really your needs and his needs?
Right. Well, Tobias, we're into the first year of this, and so it is a stated tradition. I wasn't back around in 1947, but I can imagine a little bit of the same, where you're trying to figure out who does what. And that's a key aspect that I've laid out is we got to take a look at the roles and missions inside of the Department of the Air Force. Because there's certain things that General Raymond's going to do, certain things that I'm going to do, and there's certain things we're going to do together. And I'll just tell you, I think our staffs are working through it fairly well, but there's still some areas where there's some overlap and maybe some redundancies. What I want to make sure there are no gaps in scenes as we go forward. At the same time, I want to make sure I'm providing General Raymond the right support and allow them to stand out as a separate service. And while we do things for our United States Air Force as well.
So when you talked about risk, and you had that great Dick Pole quote about, if you're not, if you're just, well, now I'm going to mess it up.
Leadership without
leadership without risk is
just
management.
Yeah.
And you said, I'm not going to manage, I'm going to lead risk. So how do you really drive that down and get other people below you to understand that, yes, you should take risk, but if you took an unreasonable risk, we're going to hold you accountable?
Because there's a balance there, and that's just why I really like the concept from General Mattis of command and feedback. And so, one of the things I've always done as a senior leader and as a commander, typically when I would send off things to my boss, versus asking for permission or saying or leaving it hanging, I would actually go, here's what I'm planning on doing, and here's what I'm planning on moving out. So I don't have to wait for a response. And if they don't respond, I'd give them at least 48 hours. They didn't respond, I was going to move out. That's the same kind of approach I think our airmen need to take. They need to be thinking about what they're doing, communicating what their intent is, and then wait a little bit of time, give their supervision a chance to respond. If they don't respond, they need to move.
So you in that same realm, you talked about General Mattis and the idea of command and control versus command and feedback. So JADC2 is all, that C2 is command and control. How do you work feedback into that?
Well, it's all the data that goes into that. It's what you're seeing, and that's the beauty. And we just did the Advanced Battle Management System demo number 2. It's all about the data and how you break that data in and package the data and use some of our AI capability to lay out options for a commander. And so part of that aspect is how you're using that information back and forth and to give feedback. And so as a lower level elements are doing things and they're just providing, here's what we're doing, you can step back and kind of watch versus trying to direct. That's the worst thing we can do with all this data is that a senior leader trying to micromanage what's going on. They really got to be thinking about their intent and lay that out and then trust our airmen to do their job. Are they going to get it exactly right? Probably not. I say we're going to have some aw shucks moments here and there. We need to learn from those. Okay, but our airmen are going to be trying to do the right thing to get the mission done. I expect that's what they'll do, and I trust them to do that.
So we have a question here. It asks, you mentioned reorgs and harvesting efficiency. Can we also reorganize to increase effectiveness? For example, take out intermediate levels of command. The Space Force, in its reorganization, or its establishing a new organization, has done that. Is there an opportunity there for the Air Force?
I want to learn from what the Space Force is doing. I think there is an opportunity. The key aspect of this is, when you talk about change, how much change do you do, and how much, as I say, how much can the market bear? We're changing so much, we're confusing ourselves, we can't figure out what's up and what's down. The key aspect of this is if we do any reorganization, we got to make sure it kind of comes in with the joint force, with our combatant commands, and don't really do no harm. We can be more efficient, that's for sure. And there's opportunity to cut down different levels of command. That's something I am actually interested in looking at. I don't have all the answers on that right now, but it is something as we look at, our bureaucracy aspect of this is, how might we reorg if we had the opportunity?
And will you have folks working on kind of concepts for that? Do you expect to have plans, or is that sort of more notional at this stage?
No, there's some concepts. There's already some discussion inside the Pentagon, even before I came into the chair. And we're building on some of the work that's already been done as we take a look at the air staff and we look at our major commands and how we might approach those. And then additionally, the work that was done in Air Combat Command under General Holmes under our wing construct. I want to take a look at all those and see what is the best way we can do this. At the same time, we got to do it smartly, because my concern there is, if we do too much, we can be completely disconnected. And so I've got to do it in a more of a methodical way as we go forward.
Innovation. I mean, it's like everybody's talked about innovation for the last few years, and almost to the point maybe of deflating its meaning. But you know, the idea of accelerating change is innovation. It's innovating faster. How do we do that in the acquisition system, for example?
Well, there's two parts. It's really, again, working with our industry partners. And it may drive us to change some of our business models to actually do like the ET7. That's an aspect of change. The other thing I'd offer up, and this really came to me after I went to Lackland and looked at our basic military training and what they had to do for COVID. That's innovation. I mean, there was really virtually very little technology involved in that approach. It was airmen thinking differently about how to execute our basic military training. So innovation is not just technology, but it's also how we do things differently inside of our Air Force and cut down some of the inefficiencies of things that we've asked airmen to do that, you know, as I look at COVID, there may be some things that we're not doing. I'm not sure we should go back and do them, you know, once we get past it and get a vaccine.
So, I mean, it's interesting what you said about COVID, because I think that's kind of the classic outside shift that drives innovation, because everybody has to respond to that forcing function that you talked about earlier.
Right. You know, it's you know, COVID actually drives a wave. You know, I just came from Hawaii, and my goal was to learn how to surf. I didn't do so well, but the goal is to ride the wave of change and accelerate what we're already doing, and that's the aspect. We're already making some changes whether we want to or not, and so don't fight the feeling. I mean, we got to keep moving, and so that's the way I'm thinking about change is taking advantage of this window of opportunity that's already driving change and moving ourselves in a different direction, and we need to accelerate.
What steps is the Air Force taking now or planning to pursue to improve inclusion? You talked before you became chief. You addressed some of those issues. What do you think needs to happen now, and what is happening right now?
Well, I think the key part is our airmen are really talking about this, and you look at what our Inspector General under General Saeed and all the information that's been pulled in, and so it's really telling us a lot about ourselves. And I think the first way you solve a problem is to admit that there is a problem. And you know, it may have been buried, not talked about as much, but because of the events with George Floyd and the other aspects across our nation, that's driving a conversation. So our airmen feel much more comfortable talking about it. The key aspect is we just can't talk. We've got to implement some programs. So there are some things that we've already done. But this is a long-term journey. You know, we didn't get here overnight. We're not going to change overnight. And so part of this is we have to take a look at the aspects of the things that the Secretary highlighted in her comments, but it's also the things we can do longer term so it just becomes part of our culture as an Air Force on how we select and promote our airmen, how we allow them different opportunities in career fields, and then how we ensure that we have good representation across the force at all levels and all career fields.
Suicides continues to be an issue. Is this a very stressful time? COVID has been stressful. The political situation has been stressful. The protests have been stressful. What are you doing to try to address that problem?
Well, the key part, you know, is under General Goldfein and Chief Wright, we did the tactical pause. And I think that was helpful because each of the wings leadership teams had a chance to figure out how best to do this. COVID has made that a bit challenging because you can't bring people together like you did in the past. And my concern here is, you know, we're teleworking, not seeing people as often. They miss that connection. I will tell you what I did see when I was there at PACAF was a real drop in suicide attempts and suicides. And then after we got into about the beginning of the summer, then things started to pick up again. The key aspect is how do we provide help with our helping agencies? And I think in some cases our airmen, they want to talk to somebody, but they don't always want to talk to someone right there on their base or have to go, you know, pull up into the chapel parking lot or over at the clinic to see a mental health provider. And so what I'm looking at is how we do this somewhat anonymous, where you can actually talk to somebody, you know, at a different base. You just want to talk to somebody. The key part is how we engage as leaders at all levels with our airmen.
So maybe there are ways to leverage what we've learned during COVID with telemental health and that sort of thing.
Before you couldn't do mental health via telemedicine. Well, now we are. And so it's broken a paradigm where we restrict ourselves in the past, and so we can use this in the future and expand on that as well. The last thing I'd say that one of the key things I find is as I look at the training information, relationship issues are typically one of the you know, close to the top of what drives some of our challenges for our airmen. How do we better help our airmen with relationships? You know, just don't tell them, hey, just go see the chaplain. Are there other ways for us to do this? You know, I don't have the answers, but these are the kinds of things I'm thinking about.
I mean, mentorship, right? I mean,
exactly.
Mentorship often is focused so much on the work and how you get to the next level in your career. But it could be, are you taking care of your family?
Well, I'll tell you, all of us, even at this level, we all have life challenges. You know, we're an FMP family, And so I've done this throughout my career and understood some of the challenges associated with that. And so the key aspect of this is we need to understand every one of our airmen has something going on in their life that's outside of what they do when they're in uniform. We got to be paying attention to that and understand and know our airmen so we can help them out in their time of need.
So, interesting question here that someone poses. Proceed until apprehended seems like a euphemism for operate without guidance. Can you articulate the difference? And I think it's an important one for people who could misinterpret what your messaging is.
Right. And so, you proceed until apprehended, you got to have some commander's intent in there, okay? And so you need to be following intent. And when you think about intent, you need to think about the intent that not only from your boss, but also from your boss's boss, and that's the way I approach things. It's incumbent on our leaders to actually understand their vision and their intent and articulate it. You can't get upset with people in your organization because they didn't meet your expectations, particularly if they don't know your expectations. And so it's incumbent, particularly in a fast-paced environment, that our leadership needs to be thinking about their intent well ahead of need. You know, the example I use, when I came into the Air Force, we didn't have email. When I was at 8, I didn't have a smartphone, I had a flip phone. And so I couldn't text people. And so when we said, hey, we're going to meet someplace at 10:30, we showed up at 10:30. We didn't wait to the last minute to text, hey, give me 5 more minutes. We got to move back to what we were doing in the past, to be able to lay enough intent out so that when they proceed, they're in between, really between the lines of where the intent that's been laid out by their commander. Will they get it exactly right? Not necessarily, but they'll be moving in the right direction. And so when I apprehend them, they're not going off, 90 left or 90 right.
So General Goldfein was all about JADC2. It was multi-domain operations, and gradually that became JADC2. Just did ABMS. That's sort of the grand experiment. It's all about the digits, but it is really about a major shift. How does that fit into the accelerate change? Are we accelerating toward that, or are we going to accelerate experimentation? What's its importance?
You look at the demos. Instead of doing ABMS and using PowerPoint slides and putting lightning bolts on slides and talking about it, we're actually going out doing demos. And is everything going perfectly? No, but you learn something. We're probably learning faster than we would if we were actually just sitting in a conference room looking at PowerPoint slides and then talking about what we're going to do 2 years from now. We're doing it right now. So that's the key aspect. The other part of this, it's really about how we move data. And that's the key aspect. And we already do that outside of the Air Force, outside of the Department of Defense. I mean, just think about when you're Googling and searching for something, the next thing you know, you have an ad show up for the exact thing you were looking for. That's the kind of concept that we can do inside of our Department of Defense. The key aspect that we look at, though, we got to take a look at our mission requirements, we got to look at our information technology systems, and then we need to look at our policies. So for me, it's kind of a little bit of a triad. And often we don't have all those same folks sitting in the same room. So we're not making enterprise-wide solutions or decisions. We're looking at from each of our perspectives, which is slowing us down. And that's an area where we've got to bring all the right people in the same room and have the meeting after the meeting in the meeting.
And change faster.
Exactly.
Thank you very much, sir.
Hey, thanks, Tobias. Pleasure
really
to be here.
Appreciate it. So we'll be right back to unpack everything we just heard. But first, let's meet our next Outstanding Airman of the Year,